Welcome to Impact Duty. I'm your host, Anjali Kirpalani, bringing you empowering stories of friends and people I admire. Their voices have given me joy and the momentum to share their stories with you. "33-year-old Anjali Kirpalani is the best-selling author of 19 Till I Die, Written in the Stars, and Never Say Never. She has written for publications like Oprah's O magazine in South Africa and Huffington Post in India. She has also been a guest blogger on MissMalini.com. Her novels are light-hearted and humorous, with quirky protagonists and a core positive message on never giving up. Anjali has been an anchor for ET Now in India and a radio jockey in South Africa. She has also co-founded a PR and marketing agency called Epic Communications in Mumbai. She is currently a screenplay writer for web series. Hi, Anjali. How are you?
Hi, Manisha. I'm great. How are you doing?
All good. Welcome to Impact Duty.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
I'm
having
so
me.
glad you're joining us.
Yes, I'm glad. I'm happy to be chatting with you today on this Saturday afternoon.
Yeah. How is it over there?
So it's as it's the monsoon season in Mumbai. So it's actually I have always enjoyed the monsoons. There are a couple of there are people who think that it's depressing or whatever when it's overcast. But I'm someone who finds it very romantic and beautiful. And since we're anyway stuck at home, I think it's the perfect weather to actually curl up with a good book. So I've been catching up on some reading in this time, and I'm quite enjoying the weather actually.
Oh, wow. Sounds delightful. Are there any pakoras to go alongside?
Haha. Well, I'm trying to be on a diet right now because I went a little crazy with food the first 3 months of the lockdown. So yeah, I'm trying to not indulge in the pakoras, but
All
yeah,
right.
chai for sure. I'm a big tea
Oh,
addict.
really?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So, Anjali, we're here today to talk about some of your writing and how you embarked on writing. And I discovered you as a writer when you released, I think, your first book, Never Say Never. And this almost fell into my lap, so to speak. I was looking for a light and beautiful book. My dad was in hospital at that time, I quite remember. And I went to the local bookstore in Bombay. And I just was totally grabbed by this beautiful pink cover. I think that's the cover of Never Say Never, right? It's a lovely
This
pink cover
pink
with a set of.
cover, yeah, that pops out.
And I must tell you, it kept me such company during my hours in the waiting room. So thank you.
I'm
Um,
so glad. Yeah, you're most welcome. I'm so glad to hear that because the thing about the book is it was actually meant to be this light, happy read that like uplifts people. So when you tell me that it did that for you, then I'm glad to hear that in a
oh,
time when
wonderful.
you know were needed and it needed it and were probably stressed out.
Yes,
So,
yes. And was Never Say Never your first book?
yes, so Never Say Never was my first book. I had actually, I had begun writing it in 2010 when I was in between jobs and sort of unsure of what to do with my life. And as you
Right.
know, the protagonist of the book, Nikita, is someone who's, she's just quit her job a few months ago. She's kind of like figuring out what she wants to do. So I was in
Right.
that space myself. And I sort of, I got the idea to write this book and I began. But then I think what happened was I got a job. I kind of got busy with that. And I think with your first book, what happens is, you have a lot of self-doubt because, you kind of question whether it's really ever going to become a book. And, you're like, oh, is this just like am I just being like crazy that, I'm going to write a book? So it always seems like this big daunting task. So I think I procrastinated a bit with it. And then it was finally in 2012 when I'd probably finished half of the book. And I kind of just had this, had just turned 25 and I was on holiday. And then I think I was just like, you know what, enough. I need to finish this book and I need to stop being afraid of what will happen. And, let me just get the, story down and we'll take it from there. And, that's exactly what I did. I sort of came back from my holiday with like renewed vigor and energy, and I finished the book. And then from there on, actually getting published wasn't that difficult. A lot of people, their
Hmm.
first book uh, tends to be difficult, and for me, I think it was kind of destiny because the publisher who ended up publishing my book, he was kind of I happened to meet him. He had come to meet my boss for something, and I happened to meet him and tell him that, I'm writing a book. And he said, oh, when you're done, send us your manuscript, which I did. And then I think within a month I'd signed my contract, and it was actually pretty smooth, I must say. Yeah.
Wow,
And
that's
and then
incredible.
all of that happened, and I think towards the end of 2012 I signed the contract, and then within 4 months, 5 months, the book was out. So it was actually very quick. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely to hear.
Yeah. So yeah, then I always sort of felt that it happened like that because it was meant to be. And yeah,
Right.
it was just about me actually getting my act together and finishing the book, which is the most important part of it, really.
Yeah. And in your books, or in that particular book, did you use real experiences, or did you base the protagonist around your life or experiences around you?
Yeah, so it's said that your first book is always going to be the one that you draw a lot from your life for, and which I think is true. Yes, because as I mentioned, I relate a lot to that protagonist because she's someone who is kind of confused, doesn't know where she's going in life. But of course, it's fiction, so I think it was a blend of fact and fiction. So as I've always said, in the book we've got Nikita who is in love with her best friend's boyfriend, and I always like to clarify that I have never gone after a friend. Now I'm married, but back then when I was single as well, I never went after anyone's husband or boyfriend or unavailable man. So it's definitely fiction, but I think the character and her traits, that is probably me because Nikita is this person she's quite humorous, and she kind of finds the humor even when she's suffering, and I am that person as well. I will try and make light of things, and I'm kind of like the joker who's making jokes in the group, in my group of friends as well. So I think whoever read, and funny enough, all my friends who read my book were like, this is you, like the character Nikita is definitely you, because even physically, like she's like 5'2.5", and so just like she's this tiny little person, and I'm also vertically challenged, so so definitely the character Nikita is a lot like me, but then the rest, I mean, there's a lot of drama which happens, and that is all fiction, what he goes through and things like that. Yeah.
Right. And Anjali, you've not always lived in Bombay, right? As in, you've been quite a global citizen, if I got that right. You've moved from country to country, and now Bombay is your home. Has moving from country to country influenced your writing or your experiences?
Yeah. I think for sure. I mean, I think, whenever you sort of study at, different places or live in different places, it definitely shapes you as a person. I think with my books, in fact, my third book, which is 19 Till I Die, which is the most recent one, is definitely influenced by my experiences because it's about these students who meet at a university in Canada, which is the University of Guelph. And I was an exchange student, and I had gone to the University of Guelph, when I was 19. So definitely that is a lot of, that is my experiences in Canada sort of reflected in that book. And then in my second book, the protagonist, Ananya, ends up taking this trip to New York to visit her brother, where again, I used my experience of having, been to New York on a holiday and like, this fun trip that I had with a friend there. All of that sort of gets incorporated. So yeah, I think, I think otherwise, in general, like your sensibilities and who you are as a person definitely get impacted by, the different places you've lived in. So I think, just as a person, I think overall, we moved to South Africa when I was 13, my family. And
really?
Yeah, I think that was actually difficult. The change was quite difficult for me because it's a very awkward age. You're kind of still finding yourself, and then to have to adjust to this whole new place. And it's not, and the thing about South Africa is you've actually got all these different races. And so I keep saying I had to get used to various accents. It wasn't just one accent. There's like the white people speak in a certain way. You have your Indian people have a very typical accent there. And they're not like Indians from India because they're third generation Indians. So they're very, they've got a lot of like a lot of their own sort of words that they use in jargon.
Totally.
A lot of stuff that you kind of pick up only as you live there. So yeah, but now that I look back on it, I mean, it was a very interesting experience, and I don't think I would be who I am if I hadn't sort of moved to South Africa, lived there. Yeah. Wonderful. So now I only look back, with fond memories, but at the time I hated my parents for doing that to me.
Why?
Why
So
did you do this?
it was Bombay to South Africa.
South Africa, yeah. So I spent 8
Okay.
years in South Africa.
Aha.
And before Bombay, it was Nigeria, but I was actually too young to remember my time in Nigeria. But our family definitely has an African connection because we're always
Really?
sort of, and now as you know, my sister lives in Ghana. So
Yes.
we've got family. Africa is like, yeah, one of our go-to places.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, that was by chance that we discovered that
yeah,
your sister is somebody I know because
already.
I'm from Ghana and
Yeah,
she's
yeah,
living in Ghana right now.
yes,
Wonderful.
yeah, small
Wow.
world.
So were you born in Nigeria? Did I get that correct? No.
So I was born in India, but my
Okay.
family moved to Nigeria when I was 1. And then I lived
Okay.
there for the first few years of my life, till I was about 6, which is why I
Right.
don't remember much about Nigeria. And then I was
Aha.
in Bombay, and I was in Bombay for 7 years. And then we moved to South Africa when I was 13.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah,
And
that's the
Anjali,
story.
did you always know you wanted to be a writer? Even from a young age, were you always did you have this feeling that you wanted to be a writer?
So I think I discovered writing actually around that time when I moved to South Africa when I was about 13, where we had these poetry writing competitions that had happened in school, and I began writing poetry. I sort of wrote it to enter into that competition, but
Right.
along the process discovered that I could actually write poetry. And I remember when my first poem when I read to my parents, they were because they'd never before that I probably hadn't shown much interest towards writing, so they were just like,
Mhm.
"What?" They couldn't believe that I'd written this. They were just like, "No, you didn't write that." I was like, "No, I did." And I think that's where it really began. And then from poetry, I moved to sort of short stories, and then I moved to I sort of actually there's a magazine, a community magazine called Beyond Sin magazine.
Ooh.
Um, yeah, and I was a regular contributor to Beyond Sin for a few years as a teenager, actually. From the time I was about 15, 16, I began
Aha.
writing for this for them, and it was pretty cool, actually. It was, yeah. Um,
Does it
you know,
still exist, the magazine?
I think it does not, but
Okay.
yeah, but I did for about 4 or 5 years. I used to write for Beyond Sin magazine. I used to contribute
Wow.
um, to the magazine. So yeah, I think and it was through all of that that I kind of discovered that I enjoy writing. Um, and then while I was in South Africa, I actually began writing these radio dramas for Lotus
Huh.
FM, which is
Ooh.
part of the South African Broadcasting Commission. And then that's where I think that was also a vote of confidence that and when the dramas got picked up that I probably do have writing potential. But I think writing a book was always just this. It just seemed like something very. It seemed like a huge daunting task. And my mom, in
Hmm.
fact, always told me that you should write a book and things like that. But I always thought I'd do it when I was much older. So I wanted to
Hmm.
pursue other dreams, and I actually always wanted to be a TV anchor, which I did
Right.
eventually end up doing also.
Really?
Yes, so I wanted to work in the media and kind of do that. And I just thought I'll write much later. But as I said,
Right.
around 2010, I kind of got the idea for my book, and it sort of took off from there. So yeah,
Wow.
that's how.
I'm going to draw you back into that TV anchor stage.
Okay.
Was this your South Africa days? This was your Bombay days?
No, so
Tell
this
us
was
more.
my Bombay days. Yeah, I worked with this channel called ET Now, which is Economic Times Now. It's part of the Times
Mm-hmm.
network, and I was a producer mainly, but I would also anchor special feature shows and also this weekend lifestyle segment, which was quite fun because we would talk about like it because otherwise it's a serious business channel, but in that segment we
Exactly.
talk about restaurants and things to do on the weekend and stuff like that. So yeah, and
Wow.
before that I'd done some freelance anchoring as well, actually emceeing a few shows as well
Aha.
as a special feature show for TV and things like that. So yeah, and while I was in South Africa, I was a radio jockey. So I kind of
Wow.
I dabbled in all the various mediums of media,
Totally.
radio, TV, and yeah, and then writing kind of stuck, and I stuck on to the writing.
Wow. Incredible.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And have there been any authors or mentors that have been inspirational?
Yeah, I think, of course. I mean, I think every writer, more or less, you kind of become a writer because you are inspired by the books you've read, and you kind of,
Right.
you look up to to people who write, who have a way with words. So I think growing up, I loved Jane Austen. I was kind of like, I love Pride and Prejudice. It's a go-to book. I love it. And I think it's amazing how after so many years, you can still relate to it. So that's amazing character right there. And then I loved, A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. So I think I love his writing. And then there's Jhumpa Lahiri, of course, and The Namesake, and which, I mean, I've read her other books as well, but The Namesake remains a favorite.
I
and
agree.
of course, the genre I write, which is chick lit, light reads, there's Marion Keyes, Fiona Walker. There are a lot of authors whose work I kind of enjoyed. And I had this phase when I was in college when I used to read a lot of chick lit. And then I think, and these books always made me feel good. So I think that was really the idea where, I wanted to write something that I would enjoy reading. And also what I enjoyed, especially about an author like Marion Keyes, is that, her books are not, so even though it's a light, fun read, she actually deals with serious issues where she will deal with alcoholism or depression and things like that. And I've tried to do that with my books, not always serious, not always as serious perhaps as that, but so in Never Say Never, the character, as a point of growing up, she does realize her privilege, and she kind of tries to give, she meets this person who's not from as privileged a background as she is, and she does this initiative to give back to society. And then we've got in 19 Till I Die, one of the characters, I mean, I don't want it to be a spoiler per se, but someone deals with an unwanted pregnancy is something I can sort of reveal. So then that as well. So just real issues that people deal with. So because, at the end of the day, life isn't always a bed of roses. Of course.
It isn't.
I mean, the idea is to at the end of it, leave you with like this, hope in your heart, and kind of, that everything works out in the end. But to get to there are, of course, ups and downs. And I think I wanted to always keep it real with my book. So that's something I have been inspired by the authors that I enjoy reading. And in terms of a mentor, I think, so actually I had already begun writing my book, but I decided to join these creative writing classes, they used to happen once a week at Xavier's College in Mumbai. And so there was our lecturer there, Renu Balakrishnan, who is, she's been a teacher for years as well as an author. And I think she, was my mentor definitely for my, especially in that first book, in terms of helping me sort of get there. So she kind of, because I remember reading a chapter or like a few pages from my first book, I'd already started writing it in that class, and where she, really enjoyed it. And she was like, she kind of made an example of it for the other students, saying, this is the kind of contemporary fiction that is working and there's a demand for it. And so I think that was a vote of confidence. And then when it actually came towards editing my book just before sending it out to publishers, she helped me with that as well. I kind of got some feedback from her. And so I would say she has definitely was a mentor and is a mentor, someone I look up to. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And what are you reading at the moment, Anjali?
So I have, I've gone a little crazy where I've bought a lot of books that are on my Kindle right now, and I have to get around to reading. But the book that I am actually reading right now is Normal People by Sally Rooney. I don't know if you've read it.
I read it earlier this year.
Yeah, so I'm enjoying it. I'm halfway through, no spoilers.
No, I won't.
And I also have this book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is by Joseph Campbell, which is a really thick book, and it's actually it's something that a lot of authors and scriptwriters, etc., have read, because it basically talks about how every hero from the beginning of time in all of mythology has a very similar journey. So it's very interesting, but yeah, I've just sort of begun that. And then on my to read list, I have a lot. So I bought a few books on my Kindle waiting for me to read. One of them is Catch 22 by Joseph Heller, a classic, which I've always wanted to read, but I haven't. So that's what I'm going to read now.
Yeah. You've just inspired me. It's time to bring out some of my classics as well. Things that I haven't read and have been on my wish list. So thank you.
Yeah, I was.
And what 3 books do you think have been absolute game changers for you?
3 books so as I mentioned, A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. I think I read it at a very young age. I was probably a bit too young for some parts of the book, but I love the book. I love how it transported me to this time, which was, post-partition India. And just, if you know the book, it's, it's huge.
It's huge.
But my favorite part of it was, the main story. I mean, the primary story, which is Lata and her search for a suitable boy. And yeah, and I absolutely loved it. And I just loved Vikram Seth's writing, and I thought it was amazing. And I think the way he captured just these like quirks and these, like Indian in how, which, and it's amazing because some things just never change in India, right? So Lata's mother and her mindset and the way she sort of speaks and thinks is something that Indian mothers still sort of do. So it's very relatable, and I love that book. So that's a go-to book for sure. And a game changer. Another one is Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen.
Yes.
I keep visiting it every few years, just because. And a third one would be, so as I said, Marion Keyes is a favorite.
Uh-huh.
And she has a lot of great books, but I think I really enjoyed Rachel's Holiday, which is basically about where the characters actually dealing with being a drug addict. So she kind of goes into rehab, and but just how she's in denial, and she kind of sort of finally understands that her actions have had really bad consequences, towards her family. And but at the end of the day, it's still a funny book, and it kind of still. So it's a really enjoyable book, and I kind of go back to it every few years as well. I quite enjoy it. Yeah.
Thank you for putting that on my radar. I hadn't even heard of it.
Yeah, you should. You will enjoy it. Marion Keyes is. I love her.
Well,
So
Marion
I love
Keys, but I haven't heard the one that you just mentioned
Rachel's
right now.
Holiday. Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
Rachel's Hall. Okay, wow.
Yeah.
And Anjali, I know the first book was rather smooth sailing, as you mentioned, but have there been any stumbling blocks as a writer, or in the process of getting published, and
Yeah.
but the other two that you
Yeah.
released?
So I think not so much the process of getting published, because fortunately, I think once you've been published, it does get a little easier, because then when you reach out to publishers as well, they know that and they can look back at your previous book and see that, oh yes, okay, it was well received. And so I've not had an issue getting published per se,
Mm-hmm.
but the issue has really been in actually writing, because I think writers do tend to procrastinate, and perhaps I am one of those who procrastinates a little bit too much. But I think it's also more aware. I think after my first book, because it had been well received, you have these sort of expectations that have been set. So then I think I did, sort of doubt myself, where I was just like, oh, can I write something, as good again? And what if it's not as good? And what if people hate it? And just, it's just all in your head, really. And also just, ideas, running out of ideas, where you're just like, oh my God, I have writer's block, and what am I going to write about? But what I have found is actually, contrary to popular belief, you should not wait for inspiration to strike. You actually do have to treat writing as just another job, where you sit down and you write. And
Mm.
even if you write, like, say 500, say like 2,000 words, of which 1,500 words are like absolute trash, and you have to delete it, there will be something useful then that you could use those 500 words. And even if it's not for that particular thing, a story that you were thinking, you can use it somewhere else. So I think the only thing to it is really just to write, and to, yeah, so to get the job done, really. So I think throughout the years, I've actually been trying to get a little better with the disciplining and getting things done. And I think that's the biggest problem, because as a writer, I think you kind of know where your story has to go. You know what you
Right.
want to do, and you have this idea of what it's going to be like. But then the actual act of sitting down and doing it can be
Mm-hmm.
quite cumbersome activity. And it's, of course, then the editing and the re-editing can be very annoying as well. So even for my latest book, which when I sent it to the publishers, I think just before that, you by the end of it, you just get to this point where you just want to finish it, because it's something that
Right.
you've been working on. It's like a thesis, and you've been doing it, and you're just waiting, and it just never ends, and you're like, oh my God, I just want this to end already. So yeah, those are the sort of the frustrations that come with writing. But I think the biggest lesson is really to be disciplined and to treat it as
Mm-hmm.
any other job, and not give in to the lofty ideas that I have to wait for creative inspiration to strike, and I can only write when I go and sit in the mountains. And like, we would all love that, but you have to write through the chaos of life, and you have to write like sitting in your house while like your child is doing something, and while something
Right.
else is happening, and thousand different
Yeah.
things happening around you, and you just gotta like sit down and do your job. So I
Yeah.
think that's really been the challenge. And I think, like, when sometimes I do think that maybe because I look at some other writers or in my genre, they tend to get books out very quickly. There are a lot of people who manage to get like, so, they probably have like 10 books out, and I'm a bit like, oh my God. But then I kind of tell myself that I think it's okay, because you have to be happy with what you're writing, and I wouldn't want to just write for the sake of writing. So at least, I can say that I'm quite happy with everything I've written, where I'm happy for because at the end of the day, it's your name going out there, and with that, thing, and with that book, I mean, it's a creation of yours, and I wouldn't ever want to be embarrassed by something I've written, or be like, oh my God, I don't want to be associated with that. I think you have to be proud of everything you've created. So it's okay to focus a bit more on quality over quantity, but then within reasonable means. Like, I think I do sometimes take longer, and I'll be like, sitting like halfway through the book, and I'm just a little like, oh yeah, I'll do it. And then I have people to keep me in check. I have like, my husband will usually be like, dude, what's your word count? And when are you finishing it? Or like, I have my sister, who's someone who from the very beginning, who I've kind of, this is not the sister, by the way. I've got three sisters. There's Amrita, Ekta, and then so there's Ekta, Amrita, and me. But Amrita has been like my confidant, because I think while growing up as well, she was someone she was very good at, like, she would help me with my English essays and things like that. And so even now I kind of run ideas with her when I'm writing my books, and she's quite busy now with her own kids and everything. But I think for my latest book, I was just like not really sure of, and sometimes that does happen as a writer. You doubt sometimes you're like, oh wow, this is fantastic, and you're like, I'm happy with what I've written, and sometimes it's just like, oh my God, what have I written? Is this even good? What's happening? It's quite funny how we swing between the two extremes. And so she's someone who I then like consult with. I'll send her my manuscript, and she'll like read some stuff, and she'll be like, okay, you can write this better. And so it helps to have a sounding board, I think, for sure. But not too many, because then you'll go crazy if you try and like incorporate too many people's views.
Yeah. And so from what I just gathered from all that, I got that you don't always have to be inspired to put pen on paper. And that was really insightful, Anjali. But what has been your best piece of advice that you've received?
I think it's actually just been this, because I think because it's something that I've struggled so much. So again, as I mentioned, my mentor, Renu Balakrishnan, something that she said in that creative writing class always stuck with me, which was basically, if you have an idea for a book or a story, just write it. She was just like, because as writers, you tend to get in your head, and you're like, oh, while you're writing, you're like, this is not sounding right, and this is like, quite crappy and things like that. And she would just be like, just write the story. You can always worry about editing and grammar later. And it's of course, it's much more daunting when you're sitting with like a blank page, or with just one page written, as opposed to when the whole thing's done, and then okay, the story's done, now I need to work on the grammar, and then I can rephrase a few things and things. That's less daunting. But she was always be like, get the story done, get the plot down. And that's the first step, and the most important step. So I think that is great advice for anyone who wants to be a writer, because I think even with my, very first book, the thing that finally got me, I think it was New Year's Eve, where like another year had passed, and I was like, what am I doing? I know I have a good idea. I know I've started this, but I'm just not finishing it. And what is wrong with me? I don't want another year to pass where I don't have anything to show for it in terms of my writing. And I think that was my final point of just like, no, let's just do it. So I think the just do it is important. Just sit down and do it, and you'll be amazed at how things come together, and how it actually happens. So the first step is to sit down, write, get it done.
Wonderful. And have you been, out of the three books, have you been attached to one character more than the others? Ananya or Nikita?
Yeah, they're all my babies, of course, for sure. But I think your first book will always, my first book, it has to be the first book, because that's, it's also new. It's the very first time. So definitely, Nikita and that character has been the one that has been, and it's also been the character that's been closest to like real life and all of that. So I think definitely that is the one that holds a lot of, like a very special, is very special. But having said that, of course, as I mentioned, because I do draw a lot from my own life and experiences, all books are special, because there's a little bit of me in everyone, and there will be, like, for every writer, that there has to be. So
And what's on the cards or in the cards for you now?
Yeah, so I've just finished writing my fourth book, which hopefully will be out soon. I don't know, I don't have a date yet, but hopefully soon. And so now, yeah, this is my phase where I'm kind of creative brainstorming is what I like to call it. You just finished one project and now you kind of want to take a little bit of a breather and like get some more, try and get it, even though I just said you don't have to wait for inspiration, but I think as a writer, you do need to read a lot, watch a few shows, watch stuff, read news, because you never know where an idea will click. So this is the brainstorming phase where I'm kind of just like reading and, doing all of that so I can figure out what I want to write about next. But having said that, I think the next step for me is also, I did this screenplay writing course a few months back, and I have actually in the past also dabbled and worked on screenplays. But unfortunately, I worked on a few things that didn't end up panning out, but I learned a lot in the process. So I think screenplay writing is definitely the direction I do want to take in terms of writing, because it's an exciting medium to write, and especially in today's day and age with the whole web, the explosion of web series and the demand for it as well. I think that is something I'm quite keen to sort of work on. So I have a few ideas for things that I want to develop. So let's see where that goes. That's on the cards right now. Yeah.
Great. Anjali, it's been an absolute delight speaking to you.
Oh, likewise. It's so fun. It's been like, speaking with a friend. Just all about myself, which I love doing anyway. I'm quite cute. Quite that we're not kidding. But it's actually been great speaking with you. Like, it's been
Same
fun.
here. Stay safe and stay blessed.
Thank you so much. You too.
Bye.